the cold barrel of a shotgun pressed against Lillian Dalton's back as her father shoved her toward the auction block in Las Animas, Colorado Territory, 1876. She stumbled forward, her blonde hair falling loose from its pins, her blue eyes glassy with unshed tears that she refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of these men with their hungry stares and jingling coin purses. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the dusty square where 30 or so men had gathered. Some were ranchers, others miners, a few clearly saloon owners looking for new girls. "What we have here is a fine specimen of womanhood. Miss Lillian Dalton, age 20, can cook, clean and comes from good stock." Lillian's fingers dug into her palms as she stood on the wooden platform. 3 days ago, she'd been preparing supper in their small cabin when her father, Thomas Dalton, had stumbled in drunker than usual, announcing he'd lost everything to a card shark passing through town. Everything including their modest homestead and the small patch of land they'd worked for 5 years since her mother's death. "Starting bid is $50, the auctioneer called. "Who'll give me 50 for this fine girl? Remember, gentlemen, this ain't just any sale. Whoever buys Miss Dalton gets her hand in marriage, all legal and proper. A marriage auction. The last desperate act of a man drowning in debt and whiskey." Lillian had screamed, fought, pleaded, but her father had simply locked her in the root cellar until this morning when he dragged her into town. $50, called a gruff voice from the crowd. Orville Jenkins, the owner of the Golden Nugget Saloon. His 3 working girls never lasted more than a few months before they were used up. 60, came another bid. Magnus Pierce, a rancher in his 60s whose 2 previous wives had died under mysterious circumstances. 75, shouted someone else. 100, called a miner whose face was so covered in coal dust that Lillian could only make out the whites of his eyes. The bidding continued, each number striking Lillian like a physical blow. Her father stood to the side, seemingly impassive, but she caught him wringing his hands, the only sign that perhaps some small shred of conscience remained. $250, called Jenkins, his eyes gleaming with victory as the other bidders began to fall silent. $500. The new voice cut through the crowd like a knife. The townsfolk parted to reveal a tall figure at the back. He stepped forward, spurs jingling with each deliberate stride. The stranger's face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but Lillian could make out a strong jawline darkened with stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Did you say 500, mister?" the auctioneer asked, clearly shocked. "That's right." The man's voice was deep, steady. $500 for Miss Dalton. "Well, I'll be." The auctioneer looked around. "Any other bids? 500 going once." Jenkins sputtered. "Now wait just a minute, 600, the stranger cut in, raising his own bid. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. "Sir," the auctioneer said, "you're bidding against yourself." The stranger pushed his hat back slightly, revealing those piercing gray eyes more clearly. "I'm aware. $700. "Now see here," Jenkins protested. "This ain't how an auction works." 800, the stranger continued, ignoring the saloon owner. Thomas Dalton stepped forward eagerly. "Sold to the gentleman for $800. The auctioneer barely had time to slam his gavel before the stranger was striding forward, pulling a leather pouch from inside his duster. He counted out the money, handing it to Thomas Dalton, who clutched it greedily. Only when the transaction was complete did the stranger turn his full attention to Lillian. He approached the platform, extending a hand to help her down. She hesitated, staring at his outstretched palm. "What's your name?" she whispered. "Yates. Yates Remington." His voice was softer now, meant only for her ears. Lillian placed her trembling hand in his, surprised by the warmth of his calloused palm. He helped her down from the platform with unexpected gentleness. "Mr. Remington," the auctioneer called, "the justice of the peace is available if you'd like to formalize this arrangement immediately." Yates turned to Lillian, still holding her hand. "Do you have belongings you wish to collect before we depart?" She nodded numbly, still in shock. "We'll return shortly," he told the auctioneer, then guided Lillian through the dispersing crowd. As they walked away from the town square, Lillian became acutely aware of the stares following them. She kept her eyes downcast, shame burning her cheeks. Only when they were out of earshot did she find her voice again. "Where are you taking me?" Yates slowed his pace, releasing her hand. "First to gather your belongings, as I said, then wherever you wish to go." Lillian stopped walking entirely. "I don't understand." Yates turned to face her, and for the first time, she got a proper look at him. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with those storm-gray eyes set in a weathered face that spoke of years under the sun. His clothing was well worn but of good quality. A dark shirt, leather vest, denim pants tucked into boots that had seen many miles. "Miss Dalton," he said carefully, "I have no intention of claiming ownership of you or forcing you into marriage. I intend to set you free." Her knees nearly buckled. "What? I couldn't stand by and watch." Something flashed in his eyes, anger perhaps, though not directed at her. "No person should be sold like cattle, but the money is worth your freedom." He said it so simply, as if $800 were nothing. "Now, would you like to collect your things?" They walked in silence toward the small cabin Lillian had called home. Her father was nowhere to be seen, likely headed straight to the saloon to gamble away his newfound wealth. Inside, she quickly packed her few belongings: a dress, some undergarments, a brush, a small photograph of her mother, and a worn book of poetry. When she emerged with her small bundle, Yates was waiting with his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion. "This is Apollo," he said, stroking the animal's neck. "He'll carry us both until we can arrange alternative transportation for you." "Where will I go?" Lillian suddenly realized she had no plan, no destination, no home. "I have a small ranch about 10 miles north of here," Yates said. "You're welcome to stay there temporarily in my mother's old room. She passed 3 years ago, or I can escort you to Denver if you prefer, where you might find employment." Lillian stared at him. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." Yates was quiet for a moment, adjusting Apollo's saddle. "Let's just say I understand what it means to be treated as property." He offered her a small, sad smile. "My mother was once in a similar position." Before Lillian could respond, shouts erupted from down the street. Thomas Dalton was staggering toward them, face contorted in rage, followed by Orville Jenkins and 2 other men. "You can't take her," Thomas shouted. "The deal ain't official without the marriage." Yates stepped protectively in front of Lillian. "The deal was for $800. You accepted payment." "For a bride," Jenkins spat. "Not for you to steal away our women." "She's not your woman," Yates replied evenly. "She's not anyone's woman but her own." Thomas lurched forward. "You trying to swindle me, boy? I'll have the sheriff on you." "The sheriff?" Yates's voice remained calm. "By all means, let's involve Sheriff Wilson. I'm sure he'd be interested to know about the illegal gambling operation you've been running, Dalton. And Jenkins, I expect he'd love to hear about how you treat the girls at your establishment." Both men faltered. Sheriff Wilson was known to be a fair but strict enforcer of the law. "Now," Yates continued, "I suggest you gentlemen return to your business. Miss Dalton will be leaving with me, and that's the end of it." He turned to help Lillian onto Apollo, then swung up behind her. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back as he reached around to take the reins. "Hold tight," he murmured. They rode away from Las Animas at a steady pace, Lillian acutely aware of the warmth of the stranger behind her and the uncertainty of her future. As the town receded into the distance, so did the life she had known. She was free, but freedom she was discovering could be terrifying. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice nearly lost in the wind. Yates didn't respond immediately. When he did, his words were simple. "Everyone deserves a choice, Miss Dalton." As Apollo carried them across the Colorado plains, Lillian watched the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It wasn't quite hope, not yet, but it was the possibility of it. The Remington ranch came into view as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. It was larger than Lillian had expected, a modest but well-maintained two-story house with a wide porch, a barn, corral, and several outbuildings. Fields stretched behind it, with cattle grazing in the distance. "It's beautiful," Lillian murmured as they approached. "It's home," Yates replied simply, guiding Apollo toward the barn. An older man with silver-streaked dark hair emerged from one of the outbuildings, raising a hand in greeting. "That's Elias," Yates explained. "He's worked this land with my family for 20 years. There's also Rosa, our housekeeper, and Federico, who helps with the herd." He dismounted first, then helped Lillian down. Her legs were stiff from the ride and she stumbled slightly. Yates's hand steadied her waist, and for a brief moment they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. Elias approached, eyeing Lillian curiously. "Didn't expect company, boss." "Miss Dalton will be staying with us for a while," Yates said, releasing her. "She needs a safe place." Understanding dawned on Elias's weathered face. He tipped his hat to Lillian. "Welcome to Remington Ranch, miss. Any friend of Yates is welcome here." "Thank you," Lillian replied, clutching her small bundle of belongings. "I'll see to Apollo," Elias offered, taking the horse's reins. Yates nodded gratefully, then guided Lillian toward the house. "I should warn you," he said quietly. "Rosa will likely try to feed you the moment we walk in, and she won't take no for an answer." As if on cue, the front door opened to reveal a plump woman with salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight bun. Her dark eyes widened at the sight of Lillian. "Dios mío, who is this?" she exclaimed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Rosa, this is Miss Lillian Dalton," Yates said. "She'll be our guest for a while." Rosa's gaze swept over Lillian's dusty dress and tired face. She clicked her tongue sympathetically. "You poor thing, you look exhausted. Come in, come in. I was just making supper." Before Lillian could protest, she found herself ushered into a warm kitchen that smelled of simmering beans, fresh bread, and something sweet. Her stomach growled traitorously. She hadn't eaten since the previous day. "Sit, sit," Rosa insisted, pulling out a chair at the wooden table. "You need food and rest in that order." Yates hung his hat on a peg by the door. "I'll show Miss Dalton to her room after supper, Rosa. Is Federico back yet?" "No, he's still checking the north pasture," Rosa replied, ladling stew into a bowl. "Sit down, Yates. You need to eat too." To Lillian's surprise, Yates obeyed without argument, taking a seat across from her. For a moment, the domesticity of the scene overwhelmed her. Just hours ago, she had been standing on an auction block, her future sold to the highest bidder. Now she was sitting in a warm kitchen, about to share a meal with strangers who had shown her more kindness in an afternoon than she'd experienced in years. "Miss Dalton," Yates's voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you all right?" She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "Yes, I'm sorry. It's just been quite a day." Rosa set a bowl of fragrant stew in front of her, along with a thick slice of bread. "Eat now. Things always look better with food in your stomach." Lillian took a spoonful of stew, nearly moaning at the rich flavor. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a properly prepared meal. Her father had expected her to cook, but food had become increasingly scarce as his gambling debts mounted. They ate mostly in silence, with Rosa occasionally urging more food upon them. When they finished, Yates stood. "I'll show you to your room now if you'd like to rest." Lillian nodded gratefully. "Thank you." He led her up a narrow staircase to the second floor, past several closed doors to one at the end of the hallway. He opened it to reveal a modest but comfortable bedroom with a single bed covered in a handmade quilt, a small dresser, and a washstand. "This was my mother's room," Yates explained, lighting the lamp on the bedside table. "Rosa keeps it clean, but no one has used it in years." Lillian stepped inside, noticing the feminine touches dried lavender hanging by the window, a small collection of books on a shelf, a delicate silver brush on the dresser. "It's lovely," she said softly. "Your mother had good taste." A shadow crossed Yates's face. "She did. There are night clothes in the dresser that should fit you. The washroom is next door, and there should be fresh water in the pitcher." He lingered in the doorway, seemingly unsure. "Miss Dalton, I want to assure you that you're safe here. The door has a lock, if that would make you more comfortable." Lillian turned to face him fully. "Mr. Remington, you've already done more for me than I could ever repay. I don't fear you." His expression softened slightly. "Get some rest. We can discuss your plans tomorrow." After he left, Lillian sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day finally catching up with her. She allowed herself the tears she'd been holding back, crying silently until exhaustion overtook her. The morning light filtering through lace curtains woke Lillian. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then yesterday's events came rushing back: the auction, the stranger's unexpected bid, the ride to this peaceful ranch. She rose and went to the washstand, splashing cool water on her face. In the small mirror above it, she barely recognized herself. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her blonde hair was a tangled mess. She did her best to make herself presentable, changing into her one spare dress and using the silver brush to tame her hair. When she ventured downstairs, she found Rosa in the kitchen, kneading dough. "Buenos dias, Miss Dalton," Rosa smiled warmly. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," Lillian replied. "And please call me Lillian." "Lillian, then. Sit, I'll get you some breakfast." "The men have already eaten and gone out to work." Rosa served her eggs, bacon, and fresh coffee. As Lillian ate, the older woman worked nearby, occasionally glancing at her with motherly concern. "How long have you worked for Mr. Remington?" Lillian asked, curious about the household. 8 years now," Rosa said, "since his father died. Before that I worked in town, but Yates's mother, God rest her soul, asked me to come help when her husband fell ill. After she passed, Yates asked me to stay on." "He seems like a good man," Lillian ventured. Rosa nodded emphatically. "The best. Takes after his mother more than his father, thank the Lord." She crossed herself. "Not that I should speak ill of the dead, but William Remington was a hard man." Lillian hesitated, then asked, "Mr. Remington Yates, he mentioned his mother was once in a situation similar to mine." Rosa's hand stilled on the dough. "That's not my story to tell, Nina. But yes, Alina Remington knew hardship before she came here." Before Lillian could ask more, the kitchen door opened and Yates entered, bringing with him the scent of sun-warmed leather and fresh air. He'd clearly been working. A fine layer of dust covered his clothes, and his dark hair was damp with sweat. "Good morning," he said, removing his hat. "I hope you slept well, Miss Dalton." "Very well, thank you," Lillian replied. "And please call me Lillian." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Lillian, then. And I'm Yates." Rosa handed him a cup of coffee. "Don't you track dirt all over my clean floor, Yates Remington. If you want to talk, take the lady out to the porch." Yates accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "Would you mind joining me outside, Lillian? There are some matters we should discuss." Lillian followed him onto the wide front porch, where two rocking chairs faced the rolling landscape. They sat, and for a moment, neither spoke, both watching a hawk circle lazily in the clear blue sky. "I've been thinking about your situation," Yates finally said. "You have options, and I want you to know them all before you decide what to do next." Lillian turned to look at him. In the morning light, she could see faint lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. "What options?" she asked. "First, you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. No strings attached." He sipped his coffee. "Second, if you prefer to make your own way, I can arrange transportation to Denver. I have connections there who could help you find respectable employment." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "Third, there's the matter of your father and the auction. If you wish, I could speak to Sheriff Wilson about the legality of what occurred yesterday." Lillian's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "What good would that do?" "My father would just deny everything and the town would take his side." "Perhaps," Yates conceded, "but sometimes justice must be pursued even when it seems unlikely." "Justice," Lillian repeated softly. "I stopped believing in that a long time ago." Yates's gaze was steady. "Then maybe it's time to start believing again." Something in his voice made Lillian look at him more closely. "You've fought for justice before, haven't you? This isn't the first time you've intervened in a situation like mine." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low and intense. "My mother was sold by her father to pay gambling debts when she was 16. The man who bought her was my father." He stared out at the horizon. "He wasn't kind to her, but she endured for my sake. When I was old enough to understand what had happened, I swore I would never stand by and watch another human being treated as property." Lillian's heart ached for the boy he had been. "Is that why you were in Las Animas yesterday?" Yates shook his head. "No, that was coincidence or perhaps providence. I was there on business, heard the commotion, and followed the crowd." "Well," Lillian said softly, "I'm grateful for that coincidence." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding that transcended words. Then Yates stood, breaking the spell. "Think about what you want to do," he said. "There's no rush to decide. In the meantime, you're welcome to explore the ranch. Rosa could use help in the garden if you're so inclined." "I'd like that," Lillian said. "I've always enjoyed growing things." Yates nodded, then hesitated. "There's a creek about a quarter-mile east of the house. Good spot for thinking if you need some solitude." With that, he returned his empty cup to the kitchen and headed back to work, leaving Lillian to contemplate her future. The days stretched into a week, then two. Lillian found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. Mornings were spent helping Rosa in the kitchen or garden. Afternoons often found her at the creek Yates had mentioned, and evenings were passed in the company of the small ranch family. Federico, the young Mexican cowhand, was shy at first but eventually warmed to her, especially when she expressed interest in learning Spanish. Elias was a man of few words, but showed his kindness in small ways, bringing her wildflowers he'd found while checking fences or carving a small wooden box for her meager possessions. And then there was Yates. He maintained a respectful distance, but Lillian often caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. They shared meals and occasional conversations on the porch in the evenings, talking about books they'd read or memories of happier times. Never about the future and rarely about the painful past. One afternoon in her third week at the ranch, Lillian was kneeling in the garden, harvesting late summer tomatoes, when she heard approaching hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw Yates riding toward the house at a brisk pace. Something in his posture set off an alarm in her mind. She stood, brushing dirt from her hands as he dismounted and strode toward her. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Your father is in town asking about you," he said without preamble. "Apparently, he lost all the money from the auction within days and is now claiming I kidnapped you." Lillian's blood ran cold. "What? That's absurd." "Sheriff Wilson sent word. He knows the truth of what happened, but he wanted to warn us that Thomas is stirring up trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Yates's jaw tightened. "He's gathering men, Jenkins among them, claiming they're going to come out here to rescue you." Lillian's hand flew to her throat. "They wouldn't dare. Men like that, with liquor and righteousness fueling them. They might." Yates glanced toward the house. "I've sent Federico to bring in the hands from the north pasture. Elias is checking the guns." "This is my fault," Lillian whispered. "I should have left for Denver immediately. I've put you all in danger." Yates stepped closer, his gaze intense. "This is not your fault, Lillian. This is what happens when men believe they own others." A shout from the house interrupted them. Rosa was calling Lillian inside. "Go," Yates said. "Stay with Rosa, I need to prepare." Inside, Rosa was moving with efficient purpose, checking windows and gathering supplies. "What can I do?" Lillian asked, feeling helpless. Rosa handed her a shotgun. "You know how to use this," Lillian nodded grimly. Living on a remote homestead, she'd learned to shoot years ago. "Good," Rosa said. "I pray it doesn't come to that, but better to be prepared." They worked in tense silence, securing the house. As dusk approached, Elias reported that riders had been spotted approaching from the south, at least a dozen men. Yates gathered everyone in the kitchen. "Rosa, take Lillian upstairs. Stay away from windows. Federico, watch the back. Elias and I will handle the front." "No," Lillian said firmly. "This is my fight too. I won't hide while you risk yourselves for me." Yates stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Stay behind me." They took up positions on the porch as the riders approached. Thomas Dalton led the group, with Jenkins close behind. Most of the men were clearly drunk, swaying in their saddles. "Remington," Thomas shouted. "Send out my daughter." Yates stepped forward, rifle held loosely but ready. "Miss Dalton isn't your property, Dalton. She's here of her own free will." "Like hell she is," Thomas spat. "You stole her. That was a legal marriage auction." "There's nothing legal about selling a human being," Yates replied coldly. "Go back to town before this gets ugly." Jenkins urged his horse forward. "We ain't leaving without the girl, Remington. There's more of us than you." "True," Yates acknowledged. "But I wonder how many of you are willing to die today." As if to emphasize his point, Elias stepped up beside him, shotgun raised. Federico appeared at the corner of the house, rifle in hand. Thomas Dalton's face contorted with rage. "Lillian, get out here, girl. Stop hiding behind these men." Taking a deep breath, Lillian stepped onto the porch. "I'm not hiding, Father." Seeing her seemed to fuel Thomas's anger further. "You ungrateful girl, after all I've done for you, all you've done," Lillian's voice rose. "You sold me like livestock. You would have handed me over to men who would have destroyed me." "You owe me your obedience," Thomas shouted. "I owe you nothing," Lillian replied, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "Go home, Father. There's nothing for you here." Thomas reached for the pistol at his hip. "I won't be disrespected by my own daughter." The shot came not from Yates or his men, but from the edge of the gathering. Sheriff Wilson rode forward, his revolver still raised. "That's enough, Dalton," he called. "The next shot won't go over your head." The sheriff wasn't alone. Behind him rode 3 deputies and several townsmen, including the justice of the peace. "What's the meaning of this, Wilson?" Jenkins demanded. "I'm preventing a massacre," the sheriff replied, "and enforcing the law. There was no legal auction. Miss Dalton is of age and free to choose her own path. Thomas's face reddened. She's my daughter. She's a grown woman, the justice of the peace spoke up. And you, Dalton, are facing charges of illegal gambling, public drunkenness, and attempting to sell a person, which has been illegal in Colorado territory since 1861. The fight seemed to drain out of Thomas all at once. He slumped in his saddle, suddenly looking old and broken. You men have a choice, Sheriff Wilson continued, addressing the group. Ride back to town peacefully or join Dalton in my jail. One by one, the riders turned their horses until only Thomas remained. He stared at Lillian with bloodshot eyes. You've chosen your side, then, he said bitterly. Lillian met his gaze without flinching. Yes, father, I've chosen freedom. With a last glare at Yates, Thomas wheeled his horse around and rode away. Sheriff Wilson approached the porch. Miss Dalton, I apologize for not preventing this sooner. I came as quickly as I could when I heard what they were planning. Thank you, Sheriff, she replied. Mr. Remington, the sheriff continued, I'll need statements from you and Miss Dalton about what happened in town that day. Just to close the matter officially. Yates nodded. Of course. Would tomorrow be acceptable? It's getting dark. Tomorrow is fine. Good evening, folks. With a tip of his hat, the sheriff and his men departed. The tension that had gripped the ranch gradually dissipated. Rosa prepared a late supper, and they ate together, the shared danger having forged a deeper bond between them. After the meal, Lillian found herself alone with Yates on the porch again, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Thank you, she said softly, for being willing to fight for me. You fought for yourself today, he replied. I was proud to stand beside you. The simple statement warmed her more than she would have expected. What happens now? Yates was quiet for a moment. That depends on you, Lillian. What do you want? The question hung in the air between them. What did she want? For so long her life had been about survival, about enduring. The concept of wanting, of choosing, was almost foreign. I don't know, she admitted. I've never had the luxury of wanting before. Yates turned to face her, his expression gentle in the fading light. Then perhaps it's time you discovered what you want. Their eyes held, and Lillian felt something shift between them, no longer just rescuer and rescued, but two people standing on the edge of possibility. The next day, they rode into Las Animas together to give their statements to Sheriff Wilson. The town seemed different to Lillian now, less threatening somehow. She held her head high as they walked to the sheriff's office, aware of curious gazes but no longer fearing them. After completing their business with the sheriff, who informed them that Thomas Dalton would be spending 30 days in jail for his various offenses, Yates surprised Lillian by suggesting they visit the general store. There are some things you might need, he explained vaguely. Inside the store, he gestured around. Choose whatever you like. New clothes, books, anything. Lillian stared at him. Yates, I can't accept more charity. It's not charity, he replied. Consider it payment for your help with the garden. Rosa says it's never looked better. She started to protest again, but the earnestness in his expression stopped her. Instead, she nodded and began to browse the store's offerings. She selected practical items, a sturdy pair of boots, 2 simple dresses, undergarments, a warm shawl for the coming autumn. At Yates's insistence, she also chose a book of poetry and a journal with a leather cover. As the shopkeeper wrapped their purchases, the bell above the door jingled. A well-dressed woman entered, followed by 2 younger women in fashionable attire. All 3 stopped short at the sight of Lillian and Yates. Mr. Remington, the older woman said, her tone frosty. How unexpected to see you in town. Mrs. Hargrove, Yates replied with a polite nod. Ladies. Mrs. Hargrove's gaze shifted to Lillian, sweeping over her with obvious disdain. And this must be the young woman we've heard so much about. Lillian felt her cheeks flush, but before she could respond, Yates stepped slightly in front of her. "This is Miss Lillian Dalton," he said firmly, "a guest at my ranch and a lady deserving of respect." Mrs. Hargrove's eyebrows rose. "Indeed. How interesting that you should speak of respect, Mr. Remington, when you're parading around town with a woman living unchaperoned in your home." One of the younger women giggled behind her hand. Lillian's embarrassment quickly gave way to anger. "Mrs. Hargrove, is it? I assure you, Mr. Remington has shown me nothing but respect and kindness, more than I can say for those who spread gossip about situations they don't understand." Mrs. Hargrove drew herself up indignantly. "Well, I never— perhaps you should," Yates interrupted mildly. "Understand, that is, before passing judgment." He turned to the shopkeeper. "We'll take these items now, thank you." Outside, Lillian released a shaky breath. "I apologize if I've damaged your reputation, Yates," he laughed, surprising her. "My reputation?" "Lillian, I've never cared what people like Agatha Hargrove think of me. Still, living under your roof, unmarried, people will talk." Yates secured their packages to Apollo's saddle before responding. "Let them talk, unless—" he hesitated. "Unless it bothers you. If you'd be more comfortable in town, I could arrange—" "No," Lillian said quickly. "I'm not bothered by gossip, I just don't want to cause problems for you." Relief flickered across his face. "Then we're in agreement." As they rode back to the ranch, however, Lillian couldn't help but wonder about the implications of her continued stay at Remington Ranch. Not for the sake of town gossips, but for her own heart, which seemed to beat a little faster whenever Yates was near. Autumn arrived in a blaze of gold and crimson, transforming the landscape around the ranch. Lillian had been at Remington Ranch for nearly 2 months now, and each day brought new discoveries about ranching, about herself, about the quiet man who had saved her. She had taken to riding out with Yates occasionally, learning the boundaries of the property and helping with simple tasks. Today, they were checking fence lines along the eastern border, riding side by side through tall grass rippling in the October breeze. "Winter comes early up here," Yates was saying. "First snow usually hits by early November." "I've always loved the first snow," Lillian replied. "Everything looks so clean and new." Yates glanced at her, a small smile playing at his lips. "You won't be saying that come February when we're digging out from the third blizzard of the season." The word slipped out before she could stop it. Yates's smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that, Lillian. Winter's approaching and you should know your options." Her heart sank. Of course he was finally going to suggest she move on. She'd overstayed her welcome. "I understand," she said quickly. "I've imposed on your hospitality far too long." "What? No." Yates looked genuinely confused. "That's not what I meant at all." "Oh." Lillian felt heat rise to her cheeks. Yates reined his horse to a stop and Lillian did the same. He turned in his saddle to face her fully. "Lillian, you're welcome to stay as long as you wish. Forever, if that's what you want." His voice was earnest, his gray eyes intense. "I just wanted to make sure you know that you have choices. The stage to Denver runs less frequently in winter. If you wanted to go to the city, it would be better to decide soon." Relief washed over her. "I don't want to go to Denver." "No." She shook her head. "No, I want to stay here." Something shifted in Yates's expression, hope, perhaps, or something deeper. "I'm glad to hear that." They continued riding, checking fence posts and mending a section that had come loose. As they worked side by side, Lillian found herself stealing glances at Yates. The sun had bronzed his skin over the summer, and today he'd foregone his usual hat, leaving his dark hair free to ruffle in the breeze. "You're staring," he said without looking up from the fence he was securing. Lillian jumped. "I'm sorry, I was just—" She trailed off, not sure how to explain. Yates finished with the fence and straightened, meeting her gaze directly. "Lillian, may I ask you something?" She nodded, suddenly nervous. "Are you staying because this is a safe place or because you want to be here?" "With us." He paused. "With me?" The directness of the question took her breath away. In the months she'd known him, Yates had never been so forward about his feelings, always careful to maintain proper distance. "Both," she answered honestly. "At first it was about safety, but now—" She took a deep breath. "Now I stay because I want to be here, because I've found something I never expected to find." "And what's that?" His voice was low, almost a whisper. "A home," she said simply. "People who care about me. And yes, you." Yates stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "I've been trying to keep my distance, to give you space to heal and decide your own path. But I find myself thinking about you all the time, Lillian. When you're not in a room, I look for you. When you laugh, it's the best sound in the world." Lillian's heart raced. "Yates, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know, and if you ever felt the same way." She reached out, tentatively placing her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beating as rapidly as her own. "I do," she whispered. "Feel the same way." For a moment they simply stood there, connected by that single touch, the autumn breeze swirling fallen leaves around their feet. Then, slowly, Yates leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers, a question more than a kiss. Lillian answered by stepping closer, her hand sliding up to his shoulder as their lips met again, more firmly this time. His arms encircled her waist, gentle but secure, and she felt herself melting into his embrace. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for a very long time," he admitted. Lillian smiled. "What took you so long, Cowboy?" His laugh warmed her more than the afternoon sun. "I was trying to be a gentleman." "Well," she said, linking her fingers with his, "sometimes a lady doesn't want a gentleman." The ride back to the ranch was filled with a new awareness, their horses walking close enough that their knees occasionally brushed. They spoke little, but exchanged frequent glances and small smiles, like two people sharing a wonderful secret. As they approached the ranch house, however, Lillian noticed Yates growing pensive. "What's wrong?" she asked. He sighed. "Nothing's wrong, but if we're to pursue this, I want to do it properly." "Properly?" "Yes." He looked at her earnestly. "You've had enough people making decisions about your life, Lillian. I want to court you openly and honorably, with your full consent." Warmth bloomed in her chest at his words. "I would like that very much, Yates." His answering smile was like sunrise. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Lillian could have imagined. Yates was attentive but never possessive, affectionate but always respectful of her boundaries. They took long rides together, picnicked by the creek, read aloud to each other in the evenings. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence on the porch, watching the sun set or stars emerge. Rosa caught on immediately, of course, her dark eyes twinkling with approval whenever she saw them together. Elias and Federico were more subtle in their observations, but Lillian occasionally caught their knowing glances. As November arrived, bringing the first dusting of snow, Yates began to include Lillian in discussions about the ranch's operations. He valued her opinion, she realized, truly seeing her as a partner rather than someone to be protected or directed. "The south pasture needs to be rotated next spring," he was saying one evening as they pored over a rough map of the property. "The grass there is getting thin." "What about this area?" Lillian pointed to a section near the creek. "It looks fertile." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "It is, but it floods easily in the spring thaw. We've never used it for grazing." My father once planted alfalfa in a flood-prone area, Lillian said. It actually thrived there and the cattle loved it. Alfalfa, Yates considered this. We've never grown it here, but it might work. Good thinking, Lillian. The casual praise made her smile. How different it was to be valued for her mind rather than just her domestic abilities. On a crisp December morning, Yates suggested they ride to a ridge overlooking the property. "There's something I want to show you," he said mysteriously. They set out after breakfast, bundled against the cold. A fresh layer of snow had fallen overnight, transforming the landscape into a glistening white wonderland. Their horses' breath formed clouds in the frigid air as they climbed the gentle slope to the ridge. At the top, Yates dismounted and helped Lillian down, leading her to the edge where the view opened up before them. The Remington ranch spread out below, the buildings tiny in the distance, surrounded by fields and pastures blanketed in snow. Beyond, the mountains rose majestically, their peaks lost in misty clouds. "It's breathtaking," Lillian whispered. "My grandfather brought my grandmother to this spot when he first bought the land," Yates said, standing close beside her. "And my father brought my mother here." "It's something of a family tradition." Lillian's heart began to race. "A tradition." Yates turned to face her, taking her gloved hands in his. "Lillian Dalton, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought something to my home that I never knew was missing." "Yates." Her voice trembled. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, the one Elias had carved for her, she realized. But when Yates opened it, it contained not her small treasures but a delicate gold band with a single pearl. "This was my mother's," Yates said softly. "She told me before she died to give it to a woman who understood the value of freedom and the power of choice." His gray eyes held hers. "I can think of no one who embodies those qualities more than you. Are you?" Lillian could barely breathe. Yates knelt in the snow before her. "Lillian, I'm asking if you would choose us for the rest of our lives. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Lillian's eyes, but unlike the tears she'd shed on that auction block months ago, these were born of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Yates, I choose you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both laughing and breathless. When he set her down, their lips met in a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. They were married on Christmas Eve in the town church, with Rosa, Elias, and Federico beaming from the front pew. Sheriff Wilson attended, along with a few townspeople who had come to respect the quiet rancher and his brave bride. Even Mrs. Hargrove made an appearance, though whether out of genuine goodwill or curiosity was anyone's guess. Lillian wore a simple white dress that Rosa had helped her make, with sprigs of holly in her hair. Yates waited at the altar in his best suit, his face lighting up when she appeared at the church door. The justice of the peace performed the ceremony, emphasizing the words freely, and by choice, with particular significance as they exchanged vows. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The wedding feast back at the ranch was a joyous affair, with tables groaning under the weight of Rosa's cooking and music provided by Federico's surprisingly skilled fiddle playing. As evening fell, guests departed with well wishes, leaving the newlyweds to begin their life together. Later, as they stood on the porch watching snow begin to fall, Yates wrapped his arms around Lillian from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy," he murmured. Lillian leaned back against him, savoring his warmth and strength. "More than I ever thought possible." "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I never told you what I was doing in Las Animas that day. Business, you said." "Yes, but specifically." He turned her gently to face him. I was meeting with a lawyer about expanding the ranch. I've been thinking about building a school on the property for the children of our workers and neighboring ranches. Lillian's eyes widened. A school? Yates nodded. Education gives people choices, makes them less vulnerable to those who would take advantage. He brushed a snowflake from her cheek. I was hoping you might consider teaching there. Rosa mentioned you used to teach your neighbors' children back at your homestead. I did, Lillian confirmed, surprised that she had shared that detail with Rosa. I loved it, actually. Then perhaps it could be your domain, Yates suggested. Your own contribution to the ranch, completely separate from being my wife. Your choice, of course. Lillian's heart swelled with love for this man who so consistently thought of her independence. I would love that, Yates. He smiled, drawing her close again. Then we'll build it in the spring. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. True to his word, Yates began construction on a small schoolhouse near the main road, where it would be accessible to children from surrounding properties. Lillian threw herself into planning the curriculum and ordering books from Denver. By summer, the school was ready. A cheerful building with large windows and simple desks Elias had crafted. On opening day, 8 children arrived, 3 from Federico's extended family, 2 from the neighboring Johnson Ranch, and 3 from a homestead to the north. Watching Lillian welcome the children, her face alight with purpose and joy, Yates felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what he had envisioned that day in Las Animas, when he'd seen her on the auction block, not just rescuing her, but creating a space where she could thrive. As summer mellowed into fall, Lillian shared news that brought tears of joy to Yates's eyes. They would welcome their own child in the spring. Rosa immediately began knitting baby clothes, while Elias set about crafting a cradle. "Are you happy?" Yates asked one evening as they sat on their porch, his hand resting gently on Lillian's growing belly. She covered his hand with hers, smiling. "I sometimes wonder if I'm dreaming, if I'll wake up back in that cabin with my father." Yates kissed her temple. "This is real, Lillian. This is your life now. Our life," she corrected softly. "A life I chose." In April, just as the first wildflowers were pushing through the melting snow, Lillian gave birth to a son they named James, after Yates's grandfather. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined spirit. As Lillian nursed their son in the quiet of their bedroom, Yates sat beside them, overwhelmed by love for his family. "I want him to know his story someday," Lillian said, stroking the baby's downy head. "Not the painful parts, necessarily, but the important ones about choices and freedom and finding love in unexpected places." "He will," Yates promised. "And he'll understand, because we'll raise him to value those things in others." 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Elena Rose, named for both their mothers. The school had grown to 15 students, and the ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. They had built something remarkable together, not just a family or a business, but a community based on respect and choice. On the 5th anniversary of the day they met, Yates surprised Lillian with a trip back to the ridge where he had proposed. They left the children in Rosa's capable hands and rode up at sunset, the landscape painted in gold and crimson. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked as they gazed out over their domain. "Staying here instead of seeking adventure in the city?" Lillian laughed, the sound as free and joyful as it had been the first time he'd heard it. "Adventure? Yates, I've had more adventure in these 5 years than most people have in a lifetime. I've built a school, raised 2 children, helped run a ranch, and fallen more deeply in love each day." She turned to face him, her blue eyes shining. "The greatest adventure isn't found in new places, but in the hearts we touch along the way." Yates drew her into his arms, marveling at how this woman who had once been sold like property had become so completely her own person, strong, independent, and fiercely loving. Besides, she added with a mischievous smile, we still have plenty of adventures ahead of us. We do indeed, Mrs. Remington, he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky. And so their story continued, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equal partners who had chosen each other freely, building a legacy of love, respect, and freedom that would endure long after the tale of an auction block and a cowboy's bid had faded into legend. 10 years after that fateful day in Las Animas, Remington Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous properties in Colorado. The school now had its own dedicated teacher, though Lillian still taught literature classes once a week and housed 30 students. Their family had expanded to include a third child, Thomas, named in a gesture of forgiveness for Lillian's father, who had died sober and repentant in a Denver hospital 3 years earlier. On warm summer evenings, they would often gather on the porch with their children, Rosa, Elias, and Federico's family, sharing stories and singing songs beneath the star-filled sky. During one such evening, as James played a tentative melody on his grandfather's fiddle, Lillian caught Yates watching her with the same intensity he had shown on the day they met. Later, as they prepared for bed, she asked, "What were you thinking about earlier? You had a faraway look in your eyes." Yates smiled, taking her hand and kissing the palm. "I was thinking about destiny, about how sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us to the best ones." Lillian nodded, understanding perfectly. Had her father not sold her that day, she might never have found this life, this love. It didn't justify what he'd done, but it had led her here to a man who had not just set her free but had shown her what it meant to truly live. "I've been thinking," she said, sitting on the edge of their bed, "about expanding the school." Yates sat beside her, interested. "How so?" "A program for women," Lillian explained, her eyes alight with purpose. "Women like I was trapped in bad situations with no skills or options to escape. We could teach them to read, to manage money, to support themselves." "A sanctuary," Yates said thoughtfully, "and an education." "Exactly. Not charity, but opportunity." Lillian's passion for the idea was clear in her voice. "What do you think?" Yates took her face gently between his hands. "I think you are the most remarkable woman I've ever known, Lillian Remington, and I think it's a brilliant idea." That autumn, they broke ground on a new building adjacent to the school, the Remington Women's Educational Center. By the following spring, they had welcomed their first 3 students. A widow from Denver with 3 young children, a young woman escaping an abusive father, and a former saloon girl seeking a different life. Watching Lillian work with these women, Yates was reminded anew of why he had fallen in love with her. Her strength, her compassion, her unwavering belief in the power of choice, these were the qualities that had first drawn him to her, and that continued to amaze him daily. As the years passed, their legacy grew. James followed in his father's footsteps, learning the ranching business with the same quiet determination. Alina Rose showed a talent for medicine and eventually studied to become one of Colorado's first female doctors. Young Thomas, creative and sensitive, became a writer whose stories of the West emphasized the courage of ordinary people making extraordinary choices. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire community gathered to celebrate not just their marriage, but the impact they had made. The school now served over 50 children, and the Women's Center had helped more than 100 women build new lives. Remington Ranch had become known throughout Colorado as a place of opportunity and second chances. During the celebration, James proposed a toast to his parents. to two people who showed us all that love isn't about possession, but about freedom, who taught us that the greatest gift we can give another person is the space to become who they're meant to be. Lillian, her blonde hair now streaked with silver but her blue eyes as bright as ever, squeezed Yates's hand beneath the table. They had weathered storms together, droughts, blizzards, economic hardships, the loss of loved ones, but their bond had only strengthened with each challenge. That night, beneath a canopy of stars much like the one that had witnessed their first kiss, they walked hand in hand along the creek that had become their special place over the years. 25 years, Yates marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I saw you in the town square. And sometimes it feels like we've been together forever, Lillian replied. Like my life before you was just a prelude to the real story. Yates stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Do you remember what you told me on our 5th anniversary about adventure? Lillian smiled. That it's found in the hearts we touch, not the places we go. You were right, Yates said softly. And your heart, Lillian Remington, has been the greatest adventure of my life. As they embraced beneath the starlit sky, both were thinking of that long-ago day when a desperate bid at an auction had set in motion a lifetime of love, purpose, and freedom. Not just for them, but for generations to come who would learn from their story that true love isn't about ownership, but about choice, the choice to see another person's worth, to fight for their dignity, and to walk beside them as they discover the power of their own voice. In the end, that was their true legacy, not the buildings they had raised or the land they had cultivated, but the lives they had touched and the example they had set of what love could be when it was founded on respect, equality, and the courage to choose each other, freely and joyfully, every single day.